Hello and welcome to another edition of FastFulcrum Friday. My name is Evans Mayhew. I'm the founder of FastFulcrum and a renegade professor. The last time we met in FastFulcrum, we discussed Ikigai and discussed how you're at the center of Ikigai and how all the elements and activities that make up Ikigai that involve self-reflection and taking stock of your values, taking stock of your assets, and then relating those to the outside world. We talked about that briefly the last time, talked about how you're at the center of all those various elements, and talked about how, like a maestro conducting music, those elements are not you. Those elements are the music, much like you are not your thoughts. But it's a good way to think about the various aspects of the things that are within our lives. So we look at what do we value. We look at what do we do for a living. We look at what are our passions and our interests, and what are the various missions and callings that we have in our life, and how can we relate that to the outside world and make it into an actual living. Then in the Remain Relevant course that I teach, we take a lot of those findings that we deeply plumb by using reflective questions. We take those findings and we begin to move them more and more out, farther and farther into the terrain of the world, and look at various competitive intelligence methodologies to examine what we find there. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, political, economic, social, technological. We really have a vast perspective, and then we relate it back to the findings that we come up with in the Ikigai explorations. But anyway, this week I want to touch briefly on the top of the diagram in Ikigai, which is what do you value, what do you respect, and what do you love? One of the things that I learned when I was working in competitive intelligence, if you start to think about hacks or maybe even shortcuts, when you're trying to understand what a competitor is trying to do or what moves that you think that they may try to make in the near future, if you come back and if you can identify somehow what they value, respect, and even love, if you can identify that, it'll give you some strong clues. If they have a reasonable amount of control over the variables at their disposal, it'll give you a reasonable clue as to what they're going to try to do and what they may be able to successfully accomplish. Sometimes people act out of congruity with what they truly value. That does happen, but more often than not, it doesn't. We don't tend to act out of alignment with our values. And so why does that matter within the age of automation? The reason that it really matters within the age of automation is that if you can truly get a handle and be very honest with yourself, it doesn't matter if you lie to me. It's neither here nor there to me. What matters is that you don't lie to yourself. If you can identify what it is that you value and you respect and you love, then you'll have a much stronger idea of which way and direction you should pivot if and when the time comes. It doesn't make sense that you would try to pivot into space that is not congruent with your values or not congruent with elements that you respect or things that you love. It simply doesn't make any sense, because that's going to present a curve, and that's not going to a developmental curve that is going to be harder to overcome in the short term. And with the age of automation, much of what we're going to be looking at is how can you be as nimble and agile as humanly possible to be able to say, well, I definitely have values in this particular area, and I definitely have elements that I respect and love in this given area. Therefore, it'll be much easier for me to pivot into that space. Case in point, I'll tell you right now, even if accounting were all the rage and there didn't seem to be any looming threat of automation in that space, I would be very, very hard pressed to try to spin up skills and abilities to try to become an accountant, because I simply don't like that kind of activity. I don't care for it. I don't value it. No offense to any accountants out there, but that's why you exist, is to help poor people like me to be able to meet the requirements that are presented in various contexts as they pertain to accounting. It's just not my thing. However, if you look at something that's more along the lines of strategy or teaching in a particular technological area or leadership, etc., that's much more my jam. And so it's easier for me to move into that space rather rapidly than it would be for me to take on something that I really don't care for. And that can apply across the board to anything. It's a very vast world out there, and not everybody can be good at everything, and not everybody can like everything. It's very important that we acknowledge that, and we don't beat ourselves up over it, and we know which way we can move quickly if and when the time comes. Now, we have quite a few reflective questions that get into Ikigai and help the individual to understand precisely what their skills are, what their values are, aptitudes, interests, and on and on. And the questions are quite difficult. And as I said, they're reflective. I had one student say to me, gosh, these questions are really hard. And I said, well, that burning means that it's working. And if you're digging deep, then yes, it should be difficult. But on the other hand, you'll get tremendous value out of it. And it's key that maybe there is a little bit of resistance or a little bit of the feel the burn element, because then perhaps we'll be more likely to remember it when the time comes. And when that time comes is when you need to remember it. You need to remember the exercises and everything that you've come to understand about yourself so that you can better respond to the situation at hand. Now, one of the things that I break down within the class is I talk about value stacks. And so in one stack you can have, well, I value these particular attributes, I guess you'd say. I value truthfulness. I value integrity. I value a strong work ethic. And that can dovetail over with the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats portion of the Remain Relevant course. But you can also look at some of the more esoteric things that we might value. We might value family, so that can be a concept. It can also be individuals, and that can slot over into love as well. We can have a very strong value that we ascribe to freedom. And something that's interesting that I think folks sometimes get a little uncomfortable with and they dance around is that people think about value and they immediately begin to think about money. And so they think, well, I do value money. I really like money. Well, I heard this said once before, and I thought it was a little syrupy, but it's kind of taken root with me over time, which is that money isn't really the thing that you love. It's the things that money bring that you probably love. You might love money in and of itself, but that's not that there's anything wrong with that. But I think it's more important to consider, what does money actually convey to us that feeds into our particular value stacks. So in my case, one of the reasons I'm totally on board with money is because it gives me freedom. It means that I don't have to do things that I might not want to do. And it allows me freedom and flexibility. And that's a big value of mine. And plus, I guess I'm just a generous guy because I like giving things to people. And money gives me the opportunity to be generous. If you don't have any coin, that's simply not going to happen. So I think that's kind of a hang-up that I think culturally we get into. We start thinking about, money's bad. Well, but money does a lot of good and can do a lot of good for you and for other people. It's just money in and of itself, whatever. It's currency, and they come and they go. But anyway, I think that considering our values in terms of various stacks, and you can even tie it to individual people. You can be like, well, my wife, my child, even my dog. These are individuals and biological entities that we value and respect and even love. That's very important because that informs our the overall fingerprint of our lives and gives us a strong idea of when the chips are down, what really matters. If we know these things, I think that it'll really help us to make the right decisions quickly. And so there we have it. That's some of the stuff that we touch on very early on in the Remain Relevant course, getting into the elements that we really value and that we really love. And throughout the entire FastFulcrum curriculum, we continually come back to that, because we come back to what at your core, Maestro, do you really love, and what do you really care about? What really matters to you? If you understand that, you're going to be much better informed and better advised by yourself in terms of which direction you should move if and when the time comes that you're impacted by automation or by any other element, in fact. So I hope you really had a good time this week. I know I did, and I'm looking forward to another installment. Next week, we're going to talk about passion, or what interests you as it pertains to Ikigai, and then to the larger world of remaining relevant in the age of automation.